All right, so like I said, a lot of video game events happened while we were gone, specifically 3 big ones, and we're going to go over those tonight. We're not going to go over every stinking game because, frankly, there's a lot there, and so at that point, we're just going to kind of go over the highlights, and also if you guys watched these events, like what you were most excited for. And so let's go ahead and start things up with the oldest event, which was the Nintendo Direct that happened last week. So a lot of people suspected that this was going to be the Zelda 35th Anniversary Direct. It turned out not to be, but let's go over some of the big announcements that happened. 1, sorry Alex, I lied, we're talking about Smash! Xenoblade Chronicles 2's Pyra and Mithra have joined the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate roster. So we had that. That was a big reveal for people. I know a lot of people were happy, and I know that Twitter was very mad because apparently, according to them, Pyra and Mithra deserve massive breast reduction. No, I'm not kidding. So we had that. We had the return of Splatoon. I mean, for crying out loud, like, Splatoon went quiet since, what, 2017, Romney? 2018,
yeah,
something like that?
Yeah, more or less. Although there are people who still play it, they stopped doing, like, the official Splatfests after a while.
Well, and then the Splatoon team went quiet, went dark after Splatoon 2's release. And so this was the first time we'd heard from them announcing Splatoon 3. We don't know too much about it, but we have been told that we will get more information later this year. And like I said, we did get a Zelda announcement, so you can't necessarily say it wasn't dealing with that. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD was announced, which allows for not only for you to be able to play with the Joy-Cons, but they have also mapped the controllers of the sword for those who have a Switch Lite, which is basically what I've been screaming for years!
Not just you, a lot of people, because, let's face it, the Waggle had a very limited capacity, and I get that Miyamoto wanted to find a way to implement it in a full-on game and not just as a small mini-game, but honestly, it should have been just a small mini-game. Instead of trying to make a full-on Zelda title with the Waggle, it should have just been, oh, here's a Zelda-themed...
Well, the perfect example was seeing Miyamoto falter on stage with it. Like, that should have been the biggest red flag for so many people, that even he can't play it. And it didn't get better from that point. It's one of my biggest complaints with Skyward Sword. But here's the thing. Like, we just barely had Mario 3D All-Stars. And I don't know about you guys, but I have played Galaxy on the Joy-Cons. Holy crap, it's such an improvement. It is such an improvement that I'm just like, you know what? Make Skyward Sword on this. Make Skyward Sword on this, because it would feel a lot better, and then they also mapped it to controllers. Just, thank you.
Though, to be fair, there is a bit of a caveat where many people who are going in thinking, oh, this is going to be exactly like Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess. Nope, you still have to actually aim the sword slashes.
Yes.
You just basically have to use the right joystick. So it's kind of like Legend of Zelda meets Jet Li's Rise to Honor, if you're one of 3 people who actually remembered that game existed, like me.
Actually, I do remember that, strangely enough. So at that point, let me just kind of go through the rest of the announcements that we had. Like I said, Splatoon 3 was basically the last announcement, and a lot of people didn't understand what that was. Mario Golf Super Rush got announced, which is a weird new take that's kind of intriguing for Mario Golf. Project Triangle Strategy, Octopath 2, is also available, and the demo was available that day. Star Wars Hunters was announced, and basically what that's being described as right now is a Star Wars equivalent of Overwatch. Like, we don't have a whole lot of those. Fall Guys was also announced for Switch. Age of Calamity is getting 2 different expansions, 2 waves of content with characters, different outfits, things like that, all happening throughout this year. So I'm guessing that's also kind of part of the 35th anniversary. The Ninja Gaiden Master Collection got announced for all the consoles, I believe, which will contain Ninja Gaiden Sigma, Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2, and Razor's Edge. So the original one, not the PlayStation 1 that had some issues.
Well, it's kind of tricky. The PlayStation 1 technically came first, and then the enhanced version for the Wii U. Ninja Gaiden...
Oh, you know what? Razor's Edge might be that Wii U version.
Yeah, Razor's Edge
Yeah.
was the expansion that basically went, hey, here's our version where we tried to fix all the problems that came out at launch because, well, we didn't know what we were doing. Sorry.
Exactly. So those are kind of the big ones. We also got Miitopia, the 3DS title, is coming to the Switch in May of 2021. A bunch of indie game announcements, including Outer Wilds. The Famicom Detective games, or 2 of them, are going to be coming to the Switch in 2021. That was exciting for me, because I've heard of Famicom Detective, but I've never played them.
Because they never came out stateside. It's a full-on side series. It's kind of in the position that Fire Emblem was in around the release of Melee, where it was huge in Japan, but nobody outside of Japan had ever heard of it because of the usual argument that Japanese developers thought that Americans and Westerners were too stupid for it.
Pretty much. We also got Samurai Warriors 5. A lot of people were happy about that, especially a lot of Muso heads that I follow personally were very happy about that. Legend of Mana is getting remastered for Switch. Like, a lot of Mana games are now on Switch. Monster Hunter Rise, they announced their story trailer. We had the Capcom Arcade Stadium. No More Heroes got a release date. And these are just kind of the big ones that happened, along with the new game that was kind of intriguing, World's End Club, which is being made by the creators of Danganronpa and Zero Escape. So a lot of people looked at that and went, oh, it looks like The World Ends With You, but it's a weird new art style. It's because it's not them. It's not the people who did World Ends With You. It's a whole other new game that the Danganronpa people are working on.
Yeah, to which I just have to say, like, oh, it's a weird new style. And I'm just like, clearly, the people saying that probably have never played Danganronpa.
Yeah.
Technically, I haven't, but I've had so many people recommend it to me because they know I'm an Ace Attorney fan. I've tried, I just can't get into it. I mean, maybe this game, since it's not actually tied to it, might be a bit more approachable for me.
You and me both. I've gotten recommended it too, and I've never had the time to be able to go play it. I mean, Famicom Detective I'm interested in because it looked like it was Ace Attorney-esque. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, with Danganronpa, I think it's just, for me, that's kind of like a too weird for me. And again, I get that people like it. It's just not really my thing. I kind of just, between the two, I prefer Ace Attorney, which is a little more grounded, and maybe I'll probably gravitate it more towards the Famicom Detective games for a similar reason. It has a very similar grounded sort of aesthetic.
Yeah.
And as for World's End Club, well, we'll have to wait until we either get a demo or get closer to the release to see if it's something that I'd be curious about.
So let's go into, I'm guessing if you guys didn't see the event yourself, you probably did see some of the trailers for it. So I'll just go ahead and go into what I was excited about because I have it all on my phone. Because shortly after, I got into a little bit of a fight with my older brother because he was mad. He was one of the people that was hoping this was the Zelda 35th anniversary direct, and it turned out not to be. And so he was a little irritated, but I was trying to say, like, well, it wasn't as bad as you're making it out to be. And so I listed, like, all the games that I was looking forward to that were coming out after that, especially the ones that we got release dates for, which is quite a number of them. So obviously I was excited for Skyward Sword, Splatoon 3, Pyra and Mithra and Smash, Ninja Gaiden, Fall Guys, No More Heroes 3, Triangle Strategist, Octopath 2. There was a point where I couldn't figure out what the second word was in my head. I kept on thinking of other things, and so I'd be like, Triangle, Octopath 2.
Yeah, which, to be fair, though, to not give people who haven't seen the event their wrong impression, it's being developed by the same team.
Same team, but it's totally not the same game.
Yeah, it's a separate game. A better correlation would be an heir apparent to Final Fantasy Tactics.
Which is a lot of people have been screaming that. Like, that is the heir apparent, or that's the spiritual successor of Final Fantasy Tactics. And you know what? It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It could be. I just don't know if it's... a lot of people are immediately assuming it's going to be an Ivalice, and I doubt that.
Given that Square has kind of established this separate company to create RPGs, if it's going to be set anywhere, I can see them tying it to Octopath. I could also see them tying it to the world of the Bravely Default series.
Yeah.
Or they could just kind of go the route of...
Especially considering that Bravely Default 2 was on the horizon. So at that point, you could easily demo that and pump that into that lore.
Yeah, but more than likely, they're probably going to go the route of, hey, we're just treating it as its own one-off thing,
Yep.
especially considering that Octopath Traveler isn't really a successor to Final Fantasy, but
Nope.
has more in common with the Saga series more than anything. And so it's probably just more a case of, hey, we're just going to take an established franchise that Square produced in the past and do our own spin on it.
I'm still
And
going to say I would love a game based in that universe again, because I did enjoy it. I don't know how you do it off the top of my head, but I would love for an actual Octopath 2. It would be awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, it really depends on if you decide to go the route of, oh, are we going to find a character from the original to follow along, or is it just going to be same world but new story with new cast of characters like they do in...
I don't know.
Well, because I mean, with Tactics, that's kind of what they did to an extent, although fan theories kind of diverge regarding whether or not Advance is technically canon, because then you've got Final Fantasy XII with characters and settings from Advance that weren't present in the original War of the Lions.
Yeah.
Game trailers came up with a pretty compelling theory that the original Ivalice in War of the Lions became the regular world in Advance, and then the world created in Advance then became the world of 12, but even then, not officially confirmed by anybody in a position to actually make that canon.
Pretty much. So other things that you were excited for, Romney, from all of this.
Well, I definitely was curious about Project Triangle Strategy. I have downloaded the demo. I haven't played it yet, but I did download it as soon as they said, oh, download this demo and then fill out this survey once playing it so we can get feedback, because I did the same thing for Demon X Machina.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a nice idea to know.
I did it for the Octopath demo too. So help them out. It really does help people.
Yeah, and especially as someone who is actually not that big of a fan of the Tactics series. Granted, that's probably because I played a lot of the really bad knockoffs of Final Fantasy Tactics that followed its exact style.
Yeah,
but
that'll do it.
Not very well. I mean, a good example of that, and I'm probably going to get flamed for saying this, but Hoshigami Ruining Blue Earth is an example of a knockoff that tries to follow it, but forgets to make it fun. I think the only strategy game I've played that's followed the Tactics format that has actually made it enjoyable has been the Shin Megami Tensei Overclocked series. But that's because, hey, we're going to actually speed it up so that way you're not sitting there forever on turns that are not yours, which is really important. So that was what got my attention. As for Skyward Sword Remastered, I'm kind of one of those, hey, I might actually pick it up, since I still have yet to actually finish Skyward Sword, because, well, I got sick of the waggle. It was one of those cases of I got tired of constantly having to stop. It interrupted the flow of the gameplay because I kept getting Wii elbow while playing it.
Yeah, and I totally understand that, because like, even for me, I finished it, but it was a slog finishing it. And by the end of actually finishing the game, I was questioning whether or not this was all worth it.
Yeah, and as for other titles, the Famicom Detective games definitely caught my eye. Again, being the Ace Attorney fan, it's kind of nice to see a straightforward mystery game that's not trying to be so out there with its premise like Danganronpa. And so I figured, okay, this has a nice, subtle supernatural edge to it, unlike a lot of other franchises that keep trying to market themselves as the next Ace Attorney, which just, no, be your own thing. Don't try to follow this format unless you actually want to follow the format. And then as for any other things that got my attention, aside from that, a lot of it was just kind of that's sort of nice.
Have you been able to try Pyra and Mithra?
Well, they are not out yet.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They weren't released.
They're coming out in March, so I don't know what day in March, but they're coming out next month, and so I'm looking forward to it. It's just, I'm looking forward to the same case of, it's a new character, because I've not played any of the Xenoblade
Are you having the same problem that a few Smash fans are, which is that it's yet another sword character?
Well, this one I feel they at least found a way to make it a little bit more unique. It's kind of like, I can see people thinking, yet another anime sword fighter, but I believe, at least looking at the way this character is working, I feel it's at least unique enough. It's not like another Mark clone or another Ike clone. Here, they found a way to make it work, and it's at least an interesting enough dynamic of
it doesn't even feel like a Shulk Echo fighter. It feels like its own thing. And so at that point, like, there is uniqueness enough that it's not too bad. Like, yeah, it's another sword fighter, but at least they play unique.
Yeah, and it's also a case of, hey, not yet another Fire Emblem character, which even Sakurai himself has admitted, yeah, we have enough Fire Emblem characters. So it's at least nice they give one of the lesser-known titles that has representation, a little bit more representation. Might make me
Alright.
actually finally check out the Xenoblade games, when I get through my backlog of other games that I keep buying and yet still sit on my shelf gathering dust.
And then also, I actually forgot another big announcement. So we did get Skyward Sword, but they did say that they did not have anything for Breath of the Wild 2. They did have a direct plan for later this year, though, to be able to address it. My guess is that direct is the one that will be Zelda 35th anniversary. So that will detail all the stuff that they're doing for that. Alex, what did you walk away excited for after this direct?
Really interested in Famicom Detective Club.
Mhm.
It's kind of funny because like a few days prior to this, I found out, oh yeah, there's a trophy for that in like Smash Melee, I think, for a Famicom Detective
Yeah.
character, which kind of got me kind of wondering because I'm like, oh, those were Japan only, but I'm like, I wonder if we'll ever see like a re-release now that kind of visual novels have sort of found their own little niche market over here. So
Yeah.
lo and behold, a remake gets announced. So yeah, I'm pretty interested in those.
I'm happy about it because this is a whole subgenre within Japan that we really haven't had any access to until Ace Attorney hit the scene. So at that point, and the fact that it had a good reception means, this is probably like during that time when adventure games really weren't happening. This is how people filled that niche. So I'm excited to see Famicom Detective, and hopefully we'll see some of the other ones that were part of that from other companies as well.
Yeah, and especially considering, again, like Ace Attorney really is kind of what's opened the door for it, because it's not just a visual novel, these Famicom Detective Club games. And again, this was actually a sizable franchise that extended beyond the initial Famicom era in Japan, where there were Super Famicom entries. And so it was one of those cases where it was basically a detective game, a classic style adventure game where you actually had to look and examine stuff and question witnesses. The kind of thing that I feel some visual novel franchises, granted, if they don't market themselves as being detective stories, that's fine. But there are some that market themselves as detective stories.
And that's where I have the problem. If you're going to market yourself that way, you got to be that way.
Yeah, you've got to actually have that investigative part. You've got to let the player actually explore the world, look at the evidence, and actually you got to let the player feel like they're the ones solving the mystery and not just, reading a book.
Yeah, I mean, for crying out loud, even Detective Pikachu had like an investigation phase because it was supposed to be part of that genre. So at that point, like, yes, it's Pokemon themed, but you at least had those elements there that people could get attached to.
Yeah,
and even Detective Pikachu 2 will have them.
Did they actually announce a second one?
They did, yeah, for Switch.
Huh.
We don't know a date yet, but yeah, they did say that Detective Pikachu 2 is in the works.
Oh, wonder if we'll get a sequel movie that ties along with it.
I wouldn't be surprised. It just depends on what the Pokemon company wants to do with it. So you were continuing on, Alex. So you were excited about the Famicom Detective games. What else?
Yeah. I guess I still don't even have the new Smash Brothers, but I think it is pretty cool to see some Xenoblade characters join in the roster.
I will say I did have a tear go down my cheek because Monolith is getting recognition.
Yeah, I think it's nice for as long as Monolith has now been a part of Nintendo.
Yeah.
For the help they also did on Breath of the Wild, that now they're really being welcomed to the family.
For me, it was more along the lines of like the Xeno series has never gotten really any recognition. And now that they're with Nintendo and Xenoblade is as popular as it is, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, I know that they're giving recognition to Xenoblade, but it feels like they're giving recognition to Xenogears.
Xenosaga by extension.
Yeah.
It's almost like Operation Rainfall actually succeeded or something.
Right. Funniest thing about that. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it for me.
Some people were interested in what you thought of Skyward Sword.
Oh. I might have to finally check out Skyward Sword. I'll see.
Yeah, I think you should. I think, in all honesty, like, I hope this becomes a really good trend because, again, have either of you played Galaxy on the Switch?
I have not.
Wow.
Okay, I played it, and look, I love Galaxy, but it's had the same waggle problems that every Nintendo game for the Wii had. and it was disappointing because it kind of takes you out of it. It doesn't give you that nostalgia feeling. It gets you frustrated. Well, we did like during the holiday season, we played Galaxy from the 3D All-Stars collection, and I was really surprised to see just how much improvement there is between the old Wiimote and the Joy-Cons. It's much more responsive. And so at that point, like, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, yeah, you need to put Skyward Sword on these things. Because then it will actually feel like a legit game, and people can have fun with it. The other one that I'm hoping also gets announced is when they finally get around to doing some Metroid announcements, that they put Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Switch, so that finally I can go finish Prime 3. Because like you were talking about Wii Elbow, I'm thoroughly convinced Metroid Prime 3 gave me fucking carpal tunnel in my left hand. So, like...
Yeah. It's very much a classic case of, yeah, the waggle controls may work for a casual market or for games that aren't meant to be played in long stretches, but there's a reason why those experiences tend to be so short. It's the same thing why VR games with motion controls aren't like massively epic 40-hour RPGs. It's because, yeah, the gimmick, you need stuff that's easy to pick up and put down, because if you have something that you can't put down as easily, and you're doing it with either motion controls or VR, it's gonna get to you. It's gonna stop being fun.
Yeah, it's gonna start pissing you off, and that was kind of the issue that a lot of diehard Nintendo fans like myself had during the Wii era. Is that, you know, we want to be behind Nintendo, we want to be able to enjoy these games, but we can't play for longer than say an hour or 2 hours, because then at that point it's painful. And it's not like, at that point, it's like, what are you willing to sacrifice for your fandom? Are you willing to sacrifice your mobility? No. And frankly, I didn't even have the worst of it, because my older brother who played Skyward Sword also had the Kinect, and that was worse. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just, yeah, and it really comes down to just that, again, that case of gameplay flow. A good example of a game that knows when to tell the player to stop is a lot of the fitness games. I mean, to use the most recent example, Ring Fit Adventures, by design, it kind of is designed to just, okay, you pick it up, you play it for a set amount of time, and then when you've played long enough, when you're starting to feel, you know, tired, stop. And so you really need that sort of that kind of structured pace to it. Trying to transplant a gimmick like that into something like Zelda with Skyward Sword, unless you actually create like those intentional stopping points. Like if you had, I don't know, it's just one of those things that if you actually had Skyward Sword structured in a way where after a set period of time, it creates kind of a nice stopping point and kind of makes it so that way, oh, you're not, you know, having it stop you arbitrarily to the point where you feel frustrated. It kind of is more like, okay, you've reached, like, you finished this dungeon. Here's a good point for you to save and stop for today. Stuff like that. But that's why the gimmick they basically should have done what they did with Link's crossbow training, just made a Zelda-themed rail slasher, kind of like Dragon Quest Sword, rather than trying to force a traditional Zelda experience into the waggle box.
Yeah.
And that's something even Aonuma kind of admitted, saying, hey, this was the last game designed in the old way. There are some things we took for Breath of the Wild, so we hope people who started with Breath of the Wild will play it, but it's kind of like, hey, this isn't exactly like Breath of the Wild. Don't go into this expecting it to be like Breath of the Wild if you've never played it before.
Yeah, I did like the fact that he said that, because like a lot of people have already been asking me if they're new to Zelda. It's like, okay, is this a Breath of the Wild like game? No, it's not. It's actually like a much more fixed story.
Yeah.
And me personally, like, I don't have a problem with the story. I think the story's fine. It's just, it's painful to get through on the Wiimote compared. And I had one of those pristine Wiimote Pluses, like, that was, you know, everything was built in, and it still was kind of crappy to play through. I don't know. We'll see what the Joy-Cons do for it. If the Unspoken, we had to cut his toenails. That fight, if we have to do that and it still doesn't control very well, then I'll be mad.
Yeah, but at least they at least give you the option of the button controls. And one thing that also frustrates me as a left-handed player is the case of, oh, you're defaulted to being right-handed with Skyward Sword.
That is a worry. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that if with Skyward Sword, if they gave the players the choice to be either left-handed or right-handed, for me, it probably wouldn't have been nearly as frustrating, because then it would be a case of, okay, I can use my preferred hand for sword swinging and by making it feel more immersive. And especially considering that canonically in all the past 3D Zelda games prior to that point, Link was canonically left-handed.
Yeah.
But the fact that there wasn't really any choice given, and I get it with the animations and all of that extra stuff, I get it. It would have been a hassle to program, but then again...
Well, and the thing that's going to blow your mind is I could tell you it was worse for Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess, they hadn't really figured that crap out yet, and they did, once again, they built it so that Link was right-handed, and when you swapped it, you actually created problems in the game because Link was left-handed. So, like, if you wanted to do those what was it, the Ancient Soldier tutorials, they barely worked if you were left-handed. You actually had to switch to, like, a lot of tutorials I remember reading about at that point was, like, switch to right-handed. That's how you finish them.
Yeah, and honestly, stuff like that, and that's something, and again, it's actually a common thing that a lot of Japanese developers just don't take into consideration. Like, Konami was the worst of it, because I remember that was something with Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, where they literally create a mode that requires touchscreen controls, but you still have to use the D-pad to, move the character, but they're just like, nope, we're not going to make a left-handed mode, even though a company like Nintendo, consequently...
You'd think that they would have learned, like Nintendo did from Zelda DS, that did that.
I mean, a better example was that Nintendo had made lefty-friendly controls with Star Fox Command, a game that I feel gets unfairly maligned, but it was a case of, hey, okay, we'll have the touchscreen be the primary control, but then we'll let the player either use the D-pad or the face buttons, depending on their handedness. And I'm just like, if they'd done that same sort of thing with Skyward Sword originally, there probably wouldn't have been as much frustration.
Nope.
But at least with the button control setup, that will at least make it a little more bearable. Still kind of dumb that it's mapped to the right joystick, but there I kind of get the feeling that Aonuma was basically having to make do with what was. It's kind of a case of, well, we can't really change this without.
But at least he mapped it to a controller. So at that point, if you can't do it that way, you at least have some other option. And the other one that I'm also glad that they did it was, I know probably more people with Switch Lites than I do with actual Switches. Now, because they just like the Switch Lite better. My older brother's entire family is on Switch Lites. Like, they have one Switch for family play, but every one of them has a Switch Lite, and two of them I know bought it themselves. So at that point, it's just like, okay, I'm so glad that you now mapped it to a controller so that people can play this.
Yeah, so hopefully it'll make it bearable. And honestly, I can see from Aonuma's perspective being like, well, Miyamoto kind of made it impossible to redesign the game to accommodate any other way, because it's kind of one of those, if they wanted to try to make it either all button-based or make it where you could switch between left and right, they would have effectively had to remake the game from scratch.
Yeah.
So I may not like the right joystick solution, but I can't necessarily blame Nintendo for implementing it, because it's kind of a, hey, this is literally the best possible option we could think of without, having to start over from scratch, because these games take an eternity to make.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move on into the next event that we have, just because, we are running on a time limit here. And so the next thing that happened was this week, and it was the Sony State of Play. I'm not going to go over all of it, because I do kind of agree with a lot of the sentiment. It was pretty boring for people, especially if you were interested in news about, I don't know, insert mainstream title here, Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, any of that stuff wasn't there. But the one that people actually specifically asked us to talk about, specifically me and Romney, is Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. So this got announced. This is after Square Enix basically said, after being asked, will you make a FF7 Remake Definitive Edition for the PS5? And they said, no. It will work. It'll work both ways. Guess what this is, boys and girls? It is Final Fantasy VII Remake Definitive Edition for PS5. It's now, granted, a lot of it is just hardware improvements, but they have decided that they're going to keep a tiny bit of story exclusive to it. There is going to be an episode involving Yuffie that is only available on that game. Even though, literally a day later, they made Final Fantasy VII Remake free on PlayStation Plus. You can download the original 7 Remake, but if you get that, you can't get the Yuffie episode. $60 for this, basically.
Yeah. I mean, on the upside, they at least offered where if you already bought a copy of the PS4 version of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you can get the PS5 version for free. So that's at least a case of, okay, well, at least they're not trying to do what, well...
See, and I will give you credit there that you mentioned that. They didn't do very well on the State of Play saying that. Because I actually got a few people asking, okay, is it free for us? Is it not free for us? And all the stuff that I was reading up until that point was $60 again. Which at that point, yeah, F you, Square Enix. No way. I already bought the game. I'll keep this. Not because, like, I'm not the biggest Yuffie fan. And a tiny little episode involving Yuffie is not going to motivate me to rebuy it. But yes, it technically is a free upgrade for those who own the PS4 version.
Yeah, specifically, if you own the PS4 version and buy a PS5. That's the key caveat here. If you buy a PS5 and then you have a copy, since the PS5 is backwards compatible, it's a case where, okay, you get access to the PS5 version for free if you already bought a PS4 version of Final Fantasy VII Remake.
But here's one thing that I want people to take away from this. Specifically Square Enix. If Sony's going to make your announcements for you, make sure they clarify that shit. Because I already know that a lot of people reached out to Square Enix's Twitter, and Square Enix did not understand why people were lashing out at them. Because the way, and I'll tell you exactly why, because the way the Sony rep did it wasn't clear that it was a free upgrade. It was still being considered, wait, you want us to pay $60 again? Consider that, please. Sorry, go ahead, Romney.
Yeah, basically the point that I was making is that at least by making it that free upgrade, it's like it's only if you have a PS5 but you bought the PS4 version and you put it in your PS5 and you've got your account linked and set up, you get the free upgrade, and the Yuffie episode is still a separate purchase. I mean, if you buy it, the Intergrade right from, if you haven't bought the PS4 version, you have a PS5 and you buy Intergrade, you get the Yuffie stuff. Whereas if you have the PS4 version and you get a PS5 and put it in, you're able to basically get the separate content with Yuffie at a
well, and from what I understand, it is only going to be that you can only download it via the PS5 version. So it is irritating to some people who don't want to upgrade to a PS5 right away. So it's not going to be offered as DLC to them. That I kind of wish Square Enix would reconsider. Just let them have it as DLC. It doesn't matter.
Well, for all we know, that could be Square Enix's plan. They could do what Capcom did with the Virgil DLC in Devil May Cry 5, where they're thinking, okay, we've got this limited time window where it'll be launching on PS5 exclusively, but then after a little bit, we'll release a PS4 version of this extra content for a discount. That's probably the smartest way to go about it, because I know that's what Capcom did with the Virgil DLC, which honestly was smart. I can see Square Enix following a similar strategy, especially if they want to try to drum up hype for the next major installment of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And one thing I am definitely curious about is that they've kind of established that they're starting to work in elements from the other parts of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, as a lot of people were speculating, oh, there are these characters that appeared in Dirge of Cerberus that will appear in this Yuffie side story, which, okay, it'll be interesting to see how they actually work in the vignettes into the main story proper, which was pretty much the main goal of the remake in the first place. Was
I don't think it was just them either. I think there's a character from Before Crisis that's going to be in there too.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of speculation, and the people at Square Enix have even made it clear, hey, we introduced a lot of characters and a lot of elements in the compilation after the fact. This is our chance to basically tell a new version of the story with all of these characters and all of these elements accounted for. And that was kind of the goal and the impetus behind the remake in general was, hey, we have a lot of these characters that we taught that in these other stories play a really big deal. Let's actually, introduce them to players jumping on. And a funny thing is, as a little bit of a side note, it wasn't announced at State of Play, but it is tangentially related, where Square also announced their Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis mobile app.
Yes, that's going to go over all of the chapter events of the compilation now. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's the other one that people wanted us to talk about, and that is the second mobile game that was also announced. Final Fantasy VII, The First Soldier. Basically, it looks like it's Fortnite meets Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, this wouldn't be the first time they've made some sort of a spin-off.
Yeah.
They literally made a mobile app based on the motorcycle chase scene minigame. So, honestly...
Well, but that had success. Do you really think this is going to have success?
Well,
I doubt it. I doubt you're going to bring the Fortnite audience over.
No, but considering how rabid the Final Fantasy VII fan base tends to be, they'll get it. They'll probably say they won't, but they will. They always do.
Yeah, that's the sad point, as far as I'm concerned. There were a couple of other announcements that were being made, but a lot of the state of play was release dates. So, for example, Kena Bridge of Spirits got a release date. Returnal, I think, also got one. Oddworld Soulstorm. So this is the remake of Abe's Exodus. Also got a release date. Crash Bandicoot 4 for PS5 got a release date. Yeah, so a lot of it was just extra release dates or confirming that something's coming out in 2021 or 2022. So Alex, really quick, do you have any thoughts on the FF7 remake that we were talking about before we move on? Because, I mean, unless Romney has something else to bring up there really isn't much to talk about at the state of play. It was pretty boring.
I mean, I will say Sifu at least looks promising.
That's the only trailer I haven't seen. And I've been told that it looks pretty good. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for the biggest comparison I've heard is that people are essentially calling it the video game version of The Raid, which I'm definitely curious to see if that comparison really holds up, considering that The Raid is still considered one of the greatest modern action movies ever to be made, so who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I was excited for Kena getting a release date, but that was about it. But then again, there are a few of these games I didn't actually see trailers for. Anyway, Alex, sorry, go ahead.
I have nothing to say on Final Fantasy VII.
Okay. All right, so let's move into the third event that we had, which was literally today. So not only is this the year of the Zelda 35th anniversary, this is also the year of the Pokemon 25th anniversary. And they got a direct just this morning. Which actually had quite a bit for Pokemon fans to get excited for, including one that I am specifically excited for, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl being announced for Switch. And I believe it's coming out this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it says late 2021.
Late 2021, yeah. So I'm excited for this simply because, like, I've played Gen 1 through 3. I've never been able to finish Gen 4, and I technically do like how Gen 8 looks on Switch, so I'm happy that the game that I'm basically working on is now coming to Switch, and I can see it in even better graphics. So I'm excited for it. What about you guys?
Well, honestly, I'm not as enthused for a lot of the world remakes. That's just because I'm just not a big fan of the Pokemon games. I mean, most of the times that I've played Pokemon, they've always been gifts. I've never actually bought the Pokemon games. It's always people have given them to me. One time, like, one of the copies I have, literally someone gave it to me out of spite. It was the funniest thing. Like, literally what happened, my older brother's roommate who lives with him bought both Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire.
Okay.
And basically it was kind of one of those cases where he was, like, literally saying, oh yeah, you're not going to play through both of these games, that I happened to be walking by, and she knew that I owned a 3DS, and she just literally looked at me and said, like, hey, you have a 3DS, right? And I'm just like, yeah, here. Literally gave me Alpha Sapphire that she bought brand new that day, and I'm just like, okay.
All right, well, there you go. That's one way to be able to get a game. Alex, are you excited for it?
Excited for it. I know it's... and I like what they're doing with it, because they're kind of keeping to the style of the original Diamond and Pearl games, which is really nice, I think. I
do like that.
And considering, I know some people were hoping for, like, a real graphical update, but that's also why the next game, Legend of Arceus, is coming out here.
Yeah, so speaking of, we have Pokemon Legends Arceus. So this is going to be an open world take on Pokemon, but the way that they've said it is that it is a prequel to Diamond and Pearl. So at that point, you will actually be able to be in the feudal past seeing the Legend of Arceus, the god of Pokemon.
Yeah, this one does have my attention, because
yes.
At least this one actually shows me an aspect of the Pokemon world that they haven't shown before. It's kind of the same reason why I've bought Detective Pikachu, because it's a case of, hey, this is actually, something that isn't just the same game every so often. I mean, that may be kind of sacrilege to Pokemon fans, but it's true. Every game pretty much is the same basic premise of, oh, you're going through gym leaders. Here it's like, okay, this gives it a nice, unique spin of, okay, it's a feudal era thing. It shows us an aspect of the history of the Pokemon world that has yet to be explored.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to see how this game turns out.
Yeah, and Alex will probably giggle at this, but everybody has been referring this game to me as Pokemon Breath of the Wild.
I got the same vibe from it when I saw the trailer. It is a little Breath of the Wild-esque. So, yeah.
But this is basically
see it.
what people have been screaming at the Pokemon Company to do for a while now, is to do like an open world Pokemon game where they can go and face trainers. And I don't know if it's actually going to be like you can take it online, but at least the fact that they're willing to do an open world, I think is an interesting take. It's going to be an interesting thing to see if it works or if it doesn't work in the Pokemon setting.
Yeah, and I'm especially finding it curious with how they're going to explain the Pokemon from other territories being in that region, particularly Pokemon like Cyndaquil and Oshawott.
Yeah. And then I also want to make sure that I hit this because, like there were 3 big games basically announced. So you had Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl. You also had Legends Arceus, but you also got a new gameplay mode in Pokemon Snap. So basically what this is adding is that it's photo editing and tools to be able to do the photo editing and all that stuff, which is intriguing. Considering that, now that you have these tools available, now people can, just make weird Pokemon wallpapers and show them everywhere.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of one of those cases of it would be weird if they didn't include it, considering that most smartphones have basic photo editing features in their
My
camera
only
app.
question is, how do you get it off?
I'm sure there's probably going to be some sort of linking thing, or even a case where, considering that the Switch uses micro SD cards that aren't proprietary, they're probably going to have some way for people to be able to share.
Because the first thing that came to my mind was maybe it links up to your Pokemon Home, and that's how you get the photo. That's how you get the pictures off. Because I think they've made Pokemon Home kind of required, haven't they?
I'm not too sure about that, but I'm
Okay.
sure they're going to find some way to link it to a social media account in some way, shape, or form. Because, well, that's what people are going to want to do. They're going to want to show off their photos to other people. So it would be in Nintendo's best interests to find a way to allow players to do that without hacking the software.
Well, and especially considering that a lot of Pokemon fans these days, now that Pokemon Go is a thing, a lot of them are pet lovers. And so at that point, they want to be able to have those snazzy pictures that they can show on social media.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it does make sense in that aspect for me. But I'm just going to be honest, like, Pokemon just did what I don't think that they've done very well in the past. They've accommodated to every facet of their fan base here. Because the Snap fans are obviously very happy at the photo editor. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, I mean, I saw lots of people talking about that and saying that it might actually be even better than some of the past remakes they've done. And then also, Pokemon Breath of the Wild. Like, it was brought up everywhere. So, yeah, I think the Pokemon Company did a good job today.
I think a large part of this is that we're seeing at Nintendo a bit of a regime change. I mean, a lot of the old guard that had kind of pigeonholed a lot of these franchises into set formulas are starting to step away. With Zelda, you're seeing Aonuma taking over, with Miyamoto kind of relinquishing control. And with the Pokemon franchise, I kind of get the feeling we're starting to see that same sort of thing, where now you've got newer developers coming in and taking over and thinking, okay, let's take this franchise and find another thing to do with it. Take it in a direction that people haven't really seen
Not
before.
only that, but I would also say that there's probably better cooperation between the two companies now. Now that you have a president of Nintendo that has been a part of the Pokemon Company. So at that point, they can collaborate better for a lot of these key announcements. And I think that also helps too. Because I do know that, like, tyrannical Nintendo would have issues with communication with any outside company, and the fact that you have a bridge does help.
Yeah, that, and I think the success of Pokemon Go has probably opened them to the idea of thinking, hey, we have a global audience we actually have to consider now. It's not just designing for Japan and expecting the same thing to be as successful the world over. Granted, Pokemon was successful the world over, even when they did cater it to a Japanese audience in mind, but it's one of those cases of, hey, we're no longer designing in the 90s. We've like games and the way people discuss them, it's a global marketplace now. And they also realize, hey, much of our fan base is comprised of adults, so we've got to find ways to shake things up now and then.
No, I agree. So I think we pretty much covered all of the highlights of this one. Alex, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I think one more thing to say is happy 25th birthday, Pokemon. 25 years old today.
I was actually going to ask you guys, did you see that there's already a Reddit war on which anniversary is more important, Zelda 35th or Pokemon 25th?
Honestly,
They
I just
both
looked.
pretty damn consequential. So happy 35, Zelda. Happy
Honestly,
25.
I just looked at this. It's just like it just depends on which franchise you like more. And I mean, if you like both, you can celebrate.
I'm just
both.
really convinced, like, people on the internet will find any reason to fight. They really will. And,
Yeah.
and it's really sad because I still love that whole collaboration between the Animal Crossing and the Doom fans. And it just would have been cool to have, like, some kind of integration between the two franchises. Nope, guess
Yeah.
not.
Guess not. I mean, it would be nice if, like, maybe if down the road they decide, oh, hey, you want to, like, maybe if they decide to bring back, like, the whole costume, like, mini-game thing was like, oh, it's Pokemon performing instead of Pokemon battling, and it's like, oh, here's a special anniversary Link costume for cosplay Pikachu or something.
Yeah, or another idea that I had was when they announced Samurai Warriors 5, I really thought that they were going to announce that Nobunaga's Ambition game that had Pokemon in it. For Switch, wouldn't it be interesting now that you have, because the way that I understand it, Nobunaga's Ambition kind of ran like a Musou game. Wouldn't it be interesting to do a fusion, like an expansion for Age of Calamity that allowed Pokemon into it?
Honestly, I don't really see it, and Nobunaga's Ambition, that series, although it's tangentially related to Samurai Warriors because of the time period and the company making it,
Yeah.
a better corollary is that Nobunaga's Ambition is more, like, gameplay-wise, it's similar to the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games, where it's
okay.
more of a strategy game. It's not a beat-em-up.
Dang.
It's very much more like a real-time strategy game. That's how those games tend to play. It's more of a turn-based strategy game, not a Musou, not a hardcore beat-em-up game. This is more, oh, you're, like, really into hardcore strategy, and I've talked to some people who've played Pokemon Conquest and found it really interesting, and I can see them maybe doing some sort of a remaster in the future. But again, that's a very special sort of niche that honestly is already being filled by Fire Emblem Three Houses. So
Yeah.
I can see maybe down the road Nintendo kind of thinking, okay, let's revisit this idea and try putting it forward. But the strategy niche is already being filled already with other franchises. So unless Koei Tecmo decides, hey, we really want to kind of pursue this and maybe do some sort of a sequel, like alternately instead of Nobunaga's Ambition, if they decide to do a Pokemon Conquest but tied with the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and have it be kind of a crossover with those characters, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
I can kind of see it working. The color scheme does allow for it between the color scheme they use for the Han, the Wu, and the Wei. I mean, I can kind of see it. I can especially see a character like Liu Bei using some sort of a Bulbasaur, and maybe Cao Cao using some sort of menacing Pokemon, like maybe a Charizard or something. Like, the idea has merit, but again, that's like really, really, really niche. And that's why even Pokemon Conquest, although it performed well critically, didn't quite sell as well because it was just too niche.
Yeah. All right, so there you go. We have all the big events that have been covered. Let's go ahead and move on into the next story that we have.